The dust cloud rising behind Cassandra Morgan's lame mare was the only thing moving on the endless Wyoming prairie that scorching August afternoon in 1878, and she knew with a sinking certainty that she would not make it to Cheyenne before nightfall, perhaps not before death itself came calling in the form of thirst or wolves or worse. Her hands trembled as she dismounted, running her fingers down the mare's swollen fetlock, feeling the heat radiating from the injury that had come on so suddenly just minutes before. 20 miles from town, maybe more, with nothing but sagebrush and wind-carved rocks stretching to the horizon in every direction. The canteen at her hip held perhaps 2 more swallows of water, and the sun showed no mercy as it beat down on her dark hair, already escaping its practical bun. She had left Fort Laramie 3 days ago with a wagon train, carrying the few possessions she owned and a heart full of desperate hope. Her aunt in Cheyenne had written that there was work for a woman with teaching skills, that the growing town needed educated folk willing to shape young minds. After her father's death 6 months prior, after the bank took their small ranch outside Denver, Cassandra had nothing left but that single letter and the determination to build a new life. But yesterday morning, impatient with the wagon train's slow pace and confident in her riding skills, she had pushed ahead alone, promising to send word back from Cheyenne. Pride, her father used to say, was a luxury frontier folk could not afford. She understood that now, standing beside her injured horse with the sun crawling toward late afternoon and no help in sight, the mare whinnied softly, pressing her nose against Cassandra's shoulder. "I know, girl," she murmured, fighting back the fear that threatened to steal her breath. "I know it hurts." She could not leave the horse, could not simply walk away and leave her to the mercy of predators. But staying here meant risking her own life, and walking meant almost certain death under this brutal sun. She closed her eyes, said a prayer her mother had taught her as a child, and tried to think. That was when she heard it, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats approaching from the north. Cassandra's hand instinctively went to the small pistol in her pocket, her father's final gift, as she squinted against the glare. A single rider emerged from the shimmering heat haze, sitting tall in the saddle atop a rangy buckskin horse. As he drew closer, she could make out a broad-brimmed hat pulled low, a dark shirt dusty from travel, and a cautious but steady approach that suggested experience in these wild lands. The cowboy reined in about 10 feet away, his eyes sweeping over the scene with quick intelligence. He was young, perhaps 25 to her 22 years, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of creek water, gray-green and sharp. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and when he pushed his hat back slightly, she saw dark hair curling at his temples. Something in his face suggested both kindness and capability, though Cassandra had learned the hard way that appearances could deceive. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice a low drawl that carried easily across the space between them. He made no move to dismount, giving her room, and she appreciated that small courtesy. "My horse went lame," Cassandra said, standing straighter despite her exhaustion. "About 20 miles from town, I reckon, maybe more." He dismounted then, moving with an easy grace, and approached slowly with his hands visible. "Mind if I take a look?" At her nod, he knelt beside the mare, running expert hands down her leg. His touch was gentle but firm, and the horse did not flinch. "Strained tendon, probably stepped wrong in a prairie dog hole. She needs rest, cold water if we can find any in time, none of which helps you much out here." "No," Cassandra agreed quietly. "It does not." The cowboy stood, dusting his hands on his worn denim pants, and looked at her with those steady eyes. The moment stretched between them, and she felt something shift in the air, though she could not have named it. "I am heading to Cheyenne myself," he said finally. "Been working a cattle drive up from Texas, got paid off in Laramie, figured I would see what opportunities a growing town might offer." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "My horse can carry double for a spell. You climb on behind me now, we can make town before full dark." Come back with a wagon tomorrow for your mare. Leave her enough water to get through the night." Cassandra's mind raced through her options, limited as they were. She knew the dangers of trusting a strange man in this lawless territory, knew the stories that circulated among women traveling west. But she also knew the certainty of death if she stayed, and something in this cowboy's manner suggested honor. Perhaps it was foolishness, perhaps desperation, but she found herself nodding. "I would be grateful," she said. "My name is Cassandra Morgan. I should know the name of the man I am trusting with my life." A smile flickered across his face, transforming it briefly into something almost boyish. James Dalton, though most folks call me Dalton, never cared much for James. He moved to his horse, a sturdy gelding with intelligent eyes, and began adjusting his gear to make room. "We will need to leave most of your supplies with the horse. Just take what is essential. Too much weight will slow us down." Working quickly, they transferred her canteen, the small bag with her money and important papers, and a clean shirt to Dalton's saddlebags. Cassandra poured half their remaining water into her hat, letting the mare drink gratefully, then scattered the rest of her provisions where the horse could reach them. It hurt to leave the few possessions she owned, items that had belonged to her parents, but survival demanded sacrifice. She tied a red handkerchief to a nearby bush to mark the spot, praying they could find it again in this sea of sameness. Dalton swung into the saddle first, then extended his hand to her. His palm was calloused and warm as she gripped it, placing her foot over his in the stirrup and pulling herself up behind him. The horse shifted slightly under the added weight, but stood steady. Cassandra settled onto the gelding's rump, acutely aware that she had to hold onto something to avoid falling, which meant holding onto Dalton. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hands lightly on his waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. "You will want to hold on tighter than that," Dalton said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "We need to cover ground, and Shadow here has a fast walk." He glanced back at her, and she noticed gold flecks in those gray-green eyes. "I promise I am a gentleman, Miss Morgan. My mother raised me right before the fever took her." Something in the way he mentioned his mother with simple grief and no self-pity made Cassandra relax fractionally. She tightened her grip on his waist, feeling the warmth of him through the shirt, and nodded against his shoulder. "Then let us go, Mr. Dalton. I have an aunt waiting in Cheyenne who will be worried sick." They set off at a steady pace, the gelding's gait smooth despite carrying double. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. For a long while they rode in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic clop of hooves, the creak of leather, and the whisper of wind through dry grass. Cassandra found herself studying the back of Dalton's head, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it brushed his collar, the set of his shoulders that spoke of strength and endurance. She wondered what had brought him north from Texas, what dreams he carried in his saddlebags alongside her few possessions. "You said you were a teacher." Dalton's voice broke the silence, startling her slightly. She realized he must have been paying attention when she spoke of teaching skills earlier. "Hoping to be," Cassandra replied. "My aunt wrote that Cheyenne needs teachers for the new school they are building. I have education, thanks to my mother." She believed women should be as learned as men, which was unusual for her generation. Sounds like a wise woman. Dalton shifted slightly in the saddle, and Cassandra adjusted her grip automatically. "What happened to your folks, if you do not mind my asking? You mentioned your father's death." The question should have felt intrusive, but somehow it did not. Perhaps it was the isolation of the prairie, the strange intimacy of riding together through the vast emptiness, but Cassandra found herself answering honestly. "Fever took my mother when I was 16. Father and I managed the ranch alone for a few years, but his heart was never the same after losing her. He died last winter and the bank took everything. Turns out he had borrowed against the land to pay for my schooling, figured it was an investment in my future." Her voice caught slightly. I wish he had told me. I would have found another way. He did what he thought was right, Dalton said quietly. That is all any parent can do. My pa died when I was 17, broke his neck in a fall from a green horse. Ma followed 2 years later, and I have been drifting since, working cattle drives, ranch work, whatever pays. Never seemed to find a place that felt like home after they were gone. Understanding flowed between them, unspoken but real. They were both orphans of a sort, both seeking something to replace what they had lost. Cassandra tightened her grip fractionally, feeling the steady rise and fall of Dalton's breathing, and watched the landscape roll past. The prairie seemed less hostile now, less empty, with another person's warmth against her and the sure-footed horse carrying them toward safety. As the sun dropped lower, painting the clouds in shades of pink and orange, Dalton spoke again. Tell me about Cheyenne. I have never been, only heard stories. They say it is growing fast since the railroad came through. Cassandra smiled against his shoulder, grateful for the distraction from her aching legs and the monotony of the journey. My aunt writes that it is quite civilized now by frontier standards. They have proper buildings, several churches, even an opera house. The railroad brought people seeking fortune or fresh starts, and the town keeps expanding. Of course, it still has its rough elements. The gambling halls and saloons do brisk business, and there are conflicts between the cattlemen and the homesteaders over land and water rights. Same as everywhere else then, Dalton observed with a trace of humor. Give people land and opportunity, they will still find reasons to fight over it. Do you think people can change? Cassandra asked suddenly, surprising herself with the question. Can we build something better than what came before, or are we doomed to repeat the same patterns? Dalton was quiet for a moment, considering. I think people are like horses, he said finally. Most are good at heart but need the right handling, the right circumstances to show their best qualities. Some are mean-spirited, broken by cruelty or born wrong, and some are exceptional, rising above their circumstances through sheer will and character. The question is which one you choose to be. The simple wisdom in his words struck Cassandra deeply. In the growing twilight, with the first stars beginning to appear overhead, she found herself reconsidering this cowboy who had appeared when she needed help most. There was more to James Dalton than dusty clothes and sun-weathered skin. There was thoughtfulness, kindness, and a quiet strength that had nothing to do with physical capability. Full darkness had fallen by the time they spotted the lights of Cheyenne twinkling in the distance. Cassandra's whole body ached from the hours of riding, her legs cramping from the awkward position, but relief flooded through her at the sight. They had made it. Dalton had kept his word, had carried her safely to town despite having no obligation beyond common decency. As they entered the outskirts of Cheyenne, the sounds of frontier civilization washed over them. Piano music spilled from a saloon, accompanied by raucous laughter and the clink of glasses. Somewhere a dog barked and voices called out in greeting or argument. The main street was lit with oil lamps, casting pools of yellow light that pushed back the darkness. Buildings lined both sides of the wide thoroughfare, some wooden structures that looked hastily built, others more substantial brick and stone that spoke of permanence and prosperity. Dalton guided Shadow down the main street, moving at a slow walk now. "Where does your aunt live?" he asked over his shoulder. "Ferguson Street on the north end of town," Cassandra replied, suddenly nervous about arriving so late and in such unconventional fashion. "The white house with green shutters," she said in her letter. "She is a widow, Mrs. Sarah Thornton. Her husband owned a mercantile before he passed. They found the house easily enough, guided by a boy who pointed the way in exchange for a nickel from Dalton. It was a neat, well-maintained home with a small garden and a picket fence, lamplight glowing warmly from the front windows. Before they could dismount, the front door flew open and a woman in her 50s rushed out, her face a mixture of relief and worry. "Cassandra, thank the Lord." Sarah Thornton hurried down the path, her skirts swishing. "I expected you yesterday. I have been nearly mad with worry." Dalton dismounted first, then helped Cassandra down, his hands steadying her when her cramped legs threatened to give way. Sarah's sharp eyes took in the situation instantly, the single horse, the way her niece had been riding behind a strange man, and her expression shifted to cautious assessment. "Aunt Sarah," Cassandra said quickly, finding her land legs. "This is James Dalton. My horse went lame 20 miles from town and he offered me aid. He saved my life today." Understanding and gratitude flooded Sarah's face. She stepped forward, extending her hand to Dalton with genuine warmth. "Then I am in your debt, Mr. Dalton. Please come inside. You must be exhausted from carrying double all that way. I insist you stay for supper at the very least, and we have a room if you need lodging." Dalton hesitated, glancing at Cassandra as if seeking permission. She found herself nodding, not ready for this strange connection to end quite yet. "Please," she added softly. "It is the least we can do." Over supper, ham and potatoes and fresh bread that tasted like heaven after days of travel rations, Cassandra told her aunt the full story while Dalton added occasional details. Sarah listened intently, her intelligent eyes moving between them, and Cassandra wondered what her aunt saw there. The meal felt oddly comfortable despite their exhaustion, conversation flowing easily as they discussed plans to retrieve Cassandra's mare and belongings the next day. "I will rent a wagon first thing in the morning," Dalton offered. "If you can draw me a map of where we left her, Miss Morgan, I should be able to find the spot." "I am coming with you," Cassandra said firmly. "She is my horse, my responsibility." "Cassandra, after the ordeal you have been through," Sarah began, but her niece shook her head. "I need to see this through, Aunt Sarah, and honestly, I am not sure I could accurately draw a map of that empty prairie. It all looks the same unless you know what you are looking for." Dalton nodded slowly. "Fair enough. We will leave at first light then, should have you back by evening if the horse can walk." After supper, Sarah showed Dalton to the small guest room at the back of the house, then led Cassandra upstairs to her own room, a cozy space with cheerful yellow curtains and a quilt-covered bed that looked like paradise. But before Cassandra could collapse into it, her aunt sat beside her, taking her hands. "That man is half in love with you already," Sarah said bluntly, "and unless I miss my guess, you feel something for him too." Cassandra's cheeks flushed hot. "We only just met this afternoon." "That is ridiculous." "Is it?" Sarah smiled gently. "I fell in love with my Thomas the moment he defended me from a drunk cowboy outside the general store. Sometimes the heart knows before the head catches up. I am not saying you should marry him tomorrow, only that you should pay attention to what you feel. Good men are rare, Cassandra, especially in wild places like this. And that young man downstairs has honor written all over him." Lying in bed later, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of town life outside her window, Cassandra replayed the day in her mind. She could still feel the solid warmth of Dalton's back against her, the strength in his hands as he helped her dismount, the way his eyes had held hers when he offered to carry her to safety. Her heart beat faster at the memory, and she pressed her palms against her cheeks, feeling their heat. It was madness to feel this way about a man she had known for mere hours. Yet she could not deny the pull she felt, the sense that something significant had shifted in her life when James Dalton had appeared on the prairie like an answer to prayer. Dawn came too early, though Cassandra had slept like the dead for the few hours allotted. She dressed quickly in her riding clothes, braided her dark hair in a practical plait, and went downstairs to find Dalton already at the kitchen table, drinking coffee Sarah had prepared. He stood when Cassandra entered, and something flickered across his face that made her breath catch. "Morning," he said simply, but his eyes said more, tracing over her face as if memorizing it. "Your aunt packed us enough food for an army. I think she is worried we will starve on the way." Sarah laughed from her position at the stove. "I packed food for sense, which you clearly lack if you are riding out again so soon, but I know better than to argue with stubborn young people." She turned, her expression more serious. "Take my husband's rifle, Cassandra, just in case." "And you," she pointed at Dalton with her wooden spoon, "you bring my girl back safely, you hear?" "Yes, ma'am," Dalton said solemnly. "You have my word." The ride back into the prairie was different in the clear light of morning. Sitting behind Dalton felt familiar now rather than awkward, and Cassandra found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait, her hands resting naturally on Dalton's waist. They talked more freely than the previous day, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Dalton spoke of wanting to own land someday, a small ranch where he could raise horses, breed them properly for the changing needs of the West. Cassandra described her passion for teaching, her belief that education could lift people out of poverty and ignorance, could build a better future. "You should do it," Cassandra said impulsively. "The ranch, I mean, there is land available around Cheyenne, good grazing land with water. You could homestead, prove up on a claim." "Takes money," Dalton replied, but she heard the yearning in his voice. "And time. Most homesteaders go bust before they make it work." "Most homesteaders do not know horses the way you clearly do," Cassandra countered. "I watched you with my mare yesterday. You have a gift, Dalton. It would be a shame to waste it working other people's cattle for the rest of your life." He was quiet for a long moment, then his hand came up briefly to cover hers where it rested on his waist, a gentle squeeze that sent warmth flooding through her. "Maybe you are right," he said softly. "Maybe it is time to stop drifting and put down roots somewhere." They found Cassandra's mare standing in the shade of a rock outcropping, favoring her injured leg but otherwise unharmed. Dalton's careful ministrations the day before had worked. He examined the swelling again, nodded with satisfaction, and fashioned a cold compress from water and cloth. "She can walk slowly," he pronounced. "We will lead her back, let her set her own pace. Might take longer, but it is better than loading her into a wagon and jostling that leg." The return journey stretched into afternoon, the three of them moving slowly across the prairie. At first they walked in companionable silence, but gradually conversation resumed, deeper now than before. Dalton spoke of losing his parents, of the loneliness that had driven him from place to place seeking something he could not name. Cassandra shared her own grief, the guilt she carried over her father's sacrifice, her determination to make something of herself to honor his memory. "He would be proud of you," Dalton said with certainty. "Striking out on your own, making a new life, that takes courage." "Or desperation," Cassandra replied with a sad smile. "Sometimes I am not sure there is much difference." "There is," Dalton insisted, stopping to look at her directly, his hand still holding Shadow's reins. The prairie stretched around them in all directions, vast and indifferent, but in that moment it felt as if they were the only two people in the world. Desperation makes people careless, makes them give up their principles to survive. Courage means holding on to who you are even when everything is falling apart. You could have married some man you did not love, could have taken the easy path. Instead, you are here, building something on your own terms. That is courage, Cassandra. The way he said her name, with such warmth and conviction, made something crack open in her chest. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers trembling slightly as they traced the line of his jaw. His eyes darkened, and for a heartbeat she thought he might kiss her right there in the middle of nowhere. But instead he caught her hand gently, brought it to his lips in a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting. "I am not much," Dalton said quietly, his breath warm against her palm. "Just a drifting cowboy with more dreams than dollars. But if you would let me, I would like to stay in Cheyenne a while, see where this goes, see if maybe we could build something together." "I would like that," Cassandra whispered, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I would like that very much." They continued walking, hands intertwined now between them, the horses following docilely. The sun tracked across the sky, and Cassandra felt as if she were suspended in a perfect moment, balanced between the loss of her past and the promise of her future. She had set out from Fort Laramie seeking a new life, but she had never imagined finding this, a connection so immediate and profound it took her breath away. By the time they reached Cheyenne's outskirts, the sun hung low on the horizon, painting everything gold and rose. They made arrangements at the livery stable for Cassandra's mare, the stable master assuring them he would tend the injury and have the horse right as rain within a week or two. Dalton retrieved Cassandra's belongings from where he had cached them in his saddlebags, and together they walked toward Sarah's house, leading Shadow between them. Sarah met them at the door, relief evident on her face. But her expression shifted to knowing satisfaction as she took in their joined hands, the way they stood close together, the unmistakable glow of new love surrounding them like an aura. "Well," she said dryly, "I see you survived the journey. Come in, both of you. Supper is nearly ready, and Mr. Dalton, I insist you stay again tonight. It is too late to find proper lodging, and besides, I suspect you will be around quite a bit from now on." Over the following weeks, as summer faded toward autumn, Dalton became a fixture in their lives. He found work at a nearby ranch, proving his skill with horses and earning respect from the other hands. But every evening he appeared at Sarah's door, hat in hand, asking permission to court Cassandra properly. They took long walks through Cheyenne's growing streets, attended church socials and town meetings, slowly weaving themselves into the fabric of the community. Cassandra began her teaching position at the new schoolhouse, finding joy in shaping young minds and preparing them for the changing world. And always, there was Dalton, steady and true, his love growing more evident with each passing day. He kissed her for the first time in October under a cottonwood tree by the creek that ran north of town. The leaves had turned gold, falling around them like benediction, and when his lips met hers, Cassandra felt every doubt and fear dissolve. This was real. This was right. This man who had appeared when she needed him most, who had offered help without expectation of reward, had somehow become essential to her happiness. "Marry me," Dalton said when they finally broke apart, his forehead resting against hers. "I know it is fast, I know I am not much of a catch yet. But I love you, Cassandra Morgan. I think I loved you from the moment I saw you standing by that lame horse, refusing to give up or give in. Marry me, and I promise I will spend every day of my life making you happy." "Yes," Cassandra said simply, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They married in November, a small ceremony in the white church on Ferguson Street with Sarah crying happy tears and half the town in attendance. Cassandra wore a dress of pale blue silk, a gift from her aunt, and Dalton wore new clothes bought especially for the occasion, though he still looked slightly uncomfortable in the stiff collar. But when he saw Cassandra walking toward him down the aisle, his face transformed with such pure love and wonder that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The words they spoke were traditional, but the feelings behind them were anything but ordinary. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, when Dalton kissed her in front of God and everyone, Cassandra felt the last pieces of her broken heart knit together. She had lost so much, her parents, her home, her sense of security. But she had gained something infinitely precious, a partner who saw her clearly and loved what he saw, who wanted to build a future together based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Sarah gave them the house as a wedding gift, announcing that she had decided to move to Denver to be near her sister, that it was time for young people to make the place their own. Cassandra protested, but her aunt was adamant. "You will need a home for the babies," Sarah said practically. "And I need a new adventure in my old age. Besides, it makes me happy to think of you here, filling these rooms with love and laughter the way Thomas and I once did." Through that first winter, Cassandra and Dalton learned each other's rhythms, building a life together in the cozy house on Ferguson Street. Dalton continued working with horses, saving every penny he could spare, while Cassandra taught school and managed their household. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, Cassandra grading papers while Dalton read books she brought home for him, improving his education with the same determination he brought to everything. They talked for hours about their dreams, refining their plans, supporting each other through the small struggles and celebrating the tiny victories. By spring, Dalton had saved enough to purchase a small parcel of land northwest of town, good grazing property with a creek running through it, and enough timber to build a modest house and barn. They spent weekends clearing land and planning, Cassandra's teaching salary supplementing Dalton's wages to buy materials and a few good breeding horses. It was hard work, back-breaking and exhausting, but they did it together, and that made all the difference. Cassandra discovered she was pregnant in June, nearly a year after that fateful day on the prairie. She told Dalton one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment he simply stared at her, and she felt a flicker of fear. But then his face crumpled, and he dropped to his knees beside her chair, pressing his face against her still flat stomach as tears rolled down his cheeks. "A baby," he whispered brokenly. "Our baby. I never thought I would have this, Cassandra, a family of my own. I thought I was too late, had wasted too many years drifting, but you gave me this. You gave me everything." She ran her fingers through his hair, her own tears falling into the dark strands. "We gave it to each other," she corrected gently. "Everything we have, we built together." Their son was born in February of 1880, during a howling snowstorm that trapped them in the house for 3 days. Dalton delivered the baby himself with shaking hands and whispered prayers, cutting the cord with a knife sterilized in boiling water and wrapping the tiny, squalling infant in clean blankets. When he placed the baby in Cassandra's arms, when she looked down at the perfect little face with its shock of dark hair and unfocused eyes, she felt a love so fierce it bordered on pain. "What should we call him?" Dalton asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and gazing at his wife and son with undisguised wonder. "Thomas," Cassandra said softly, thinking of her aunt's late husband, of the gift of the house that had given them their start. Thomas James Dalton, a good strong name for a Wyoming boy. Life settled into a new rhythm after Thomas's birth. Cassandra took a break from teaching to care for the baby, while Dalton worked even harder to build up their horse breeding operation. The ranch slowly took shape, a sturdy house rising timber by timber, corrals and pastures fenced and ready for the growing herd. By the time Thomas took his first steps, they had moved out to the property full-time, though they kept the house in town and rented it to a young lawyer and his wife. More children followed over the years. A daughter they named Sarah in honor of Cassandra's aunt, who had passed peacefully in Denver surrounded by family. Then twin boys who kept them running from dawn to dusk, followed by another daughter with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray-green eyes. The ranch prospered as Dalton's reputation for breeding quality horses spread throughout Wyoming and beyond. Cassandra eventually returned to teaching part-time, holding classes in their large kitchen for the scattered ranch children in the area, refusing payment, but accepting barter in the form of goods and services. Through it all, through the lean years and the prosperous ones, through illness and injury and the inevitable conflicts that arose in a growing territory, Cassandra and Dalton remained each other's constant. They never forgot that moment on the prairie when their lives had intersected, when a lame horse and a cowboy's kindness had set them on this path. Every year on the anniversary of that August day, they rode out together to the spot where they had met, or as close as they could find it in the endless sameness of the grasslands. They would stand there holding hands, remembering who they had been and marveling at who they had become. On their 20th wedding anniversary, with their children grown and starting families of their own, Cassandra and Dalton took a rare evening alone together. They sat on the porch of the ranch house they had built with their own hands, watching the sun set over land that belonged to them, that would pass to their children and grandchildren. The air was soft with the promise of summer, and from the barn came the gentle sounds of horses settling for the night. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had ridden past that day?" Cassandra asked, leaning against her husband's solid shoulder. If you had decided helping a stranded woman was not worth the trouble, Dalton was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her. I thank God every day that I did not, he said finally, because everything good in my life comes from that choice. You, our children, this place we have built. All of it stems from that moment when I saw you standing by that lame horse, refusing to give up. He turned to look at her, and his eyes held the same warmth and love they had from the beginning, perhaps deeper now for having weathered 20 years of life together. You were the bravest person I had ever seen, Cassandra. You still are. I was terrified, she admitted with a laugh. But I was also desperate enough to trust a stranger. Thank God that stranger was you. Climb on behind me now, Dalton quoted softly, echoing those first words he had spoken to her. Best thing I ever said. Best thing I ever heard, Cassandra replied, lifting her face for his kiss. As darkness fell over the Wyoming prairie, over the ranch they had carved from wilderness through love and determination, and sheer stubborn will, Cassandra reflected on the strange paths life took. She had set out for Cheyenne seeking nothing more than survival, a chance to use her education and build a modest life. Instead, she had found partnership, passion, purpose, and a love that had only grown stronger with time. The lame horse that had seemed like a disaster had actually been Providence, bringing her exactly where she needed to be at exactly the right moment to meet the man who would become her everything. Their grandchildren visited often, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. Thomas had followed his father into horse breeding, expanding the operation and earning national recognition for the quality of their stock. Sarah had married a doctor and moved to Cheyenne, where she ran a school for girls and advocated loudly for women's rights. The twins had struck out for Montana with their wives, seeking new opportunities on the frontier. And their youngest daughter, the one with Dalton's eyes, had surprised everyone by becoming a writer, publishing stories about the West in Eastern magazines and making quite a name for herself. Watching them all, seeing how the love she and Dalton had built had rippled outward to create this sprawling, complicated, beautiful family, Cassandra sometimes had to pinch herself to believe it was real. From such a small act of kindness, from one cowboy's decision to help a stranger in need, all of this had grown. It seemed impossible, miraculous even, but it was undeniably true. On a crisp October morning in 1898, Cassandra stood in the kitchen of their ranch house, kneading bread dough while sunlight streamed through the windows. She was 62 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, her hands marked by years of hard work. But she felt younger than her years, still vital and engaged with life. Dalton was out in the barn with Thomas, the two of them training a particularly promising yearling, and their voices carried to her on the autumn breeze, warm with shared purpose and affection. The door opened and Dalton came in, moving a bit slower than he once had but still strong and capable at 65. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, kissing the side of her neck in a gesture made familiar by decades of repetition, but no less sweet for it. "Remember when you could not cook at all?" he teased gently. "That first month of marriage I thought we might starve despite our best efforts." Cassandra laughed, leaning back against him. "I remember you gamely eating burnt stew and claiming it was delicious." "You are a terrible liar, James Dalton." "Maybe so," he agreed, turning her to face him, his flour-dusted hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "But I have never lied about loving you. That has been the truest thing about me from the beginning." She kissed him then, there in their sunlit kitchen with the smell of rising bread around them and the sounds of their life together filling the air. Outside, the prairie stretched to the horizon, vast and beautiful and sometimes harsh, but they had made a home here. They had taken the raw materials of loss and loneliness and forged something enduring, something that would outlast them both in the lives of their children and the legacy of their love. That evening, with family gathered around their long dining table for Sunday supper, Cassandra looked at the faces surrounding her and felt her heart swell nearly to bursting. Thomas sat with his wife and 3 children, already expecting a fourth. Sarah had come from Cheyenne with her husband and their 2 daughters. The twins had sent a telegram saying they could not make it this month, but would visit for Christmas. And their youngest daughter sat beside her new husband, a kind young man who looked at her the way Dalton had looked at Cassandra all those years ago, with wonder and devotion. After the meal, after the dishes were cleared and the grandchildren were playing outside in the last of the daylight, Dalton stood and cleared his throat. The conversation died down as everyone turned to look at him. He was not a man given to speeches, and the gesture was unusual enough to command attention. "I just wanted to say something," Dalton began, his hand finding Cassandra's where she sat beside him. "Your mother and we have been blessed beyond measure. We started with nothing but each other and a dream, and look at what we have built. This ranch, this family, this life. None of it would exist if not for a lame horse and a decision to help a stranger." He paused, emotion thickening his voice. "I want you all to remember that. Remember that small acts of kindness can change everything, that love and hard work can overcome almost any obstacle, and that the best things in life often come from the moments that seem like disasters at the time." Thomas raised his glass. "To Ma and Pa," he said simply, "for showing us what love looks like." "To Ma and Pa," the others echoed, glasses lifting all around the table. Cassandra felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, grateful tears. She looked at Dalton and saw the same emotion reflected in his eyes. They had done it. Against all odds, despite beginning with nothing, they had built something beautiful and lasting. Their love story had started on a desolate prairie with a disabled horse and a cowboy's kindness, and it had grown into this, into legacy and family, and a future that would extend far beyond their own lives. Later that night, lying in bed with Dalton's arms around her and the sounds of the ranch settling into sleep around them, Cassandra whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." "For what?" Dalton murmured, half asleep. "For stopping that day, for offering help, for loving me all these years." "For everything." She felt him smile against her hair. "I should be thanking you," he said softly. "You took a chance on a drifting cowboy with nothing to offer but a horse and a promise. You gave me a reason to stop running, a place to call home. You gave me everything that matters." "We gave it to each other," Cassandra said, repeating the words she had spoken so long ago when she told him about their first baby. "Everything we have, we built together." "Together," Dalton agreed, his arms tightening around her, "always together." As sleep claimed them both, as the Wyoming stars wheeled overhead and the prairie wind whispered through the grass, Cassandra felt the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived, from love freely given and generously returned. The journey that had begun with disaster and desperation had led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect life. And she would not change a single moment of it, not the struggles or the sorrows or the countless small sacrifices that had brought them to this place. Because in the end, love was not just about the grand gestures or the dramatic moments. It was about showing up, day after day, year after year, choosing each other again and again through whatever life brought. It was Dalton adjusting his saddle to make room for her that first day. It was Cassandra holding his hand as he delivered their first child. It was the thousand small kindnesses and considerations that had woven their lives together into something stronger than either of them could have built alone. Her horse had gone lame 20 miles from town on a scorching August day in 1878. A cowboy had ridden up and said, "Climb on behind me now." And from that simple moment, from that basic human decency extended to a stranger in need, had come this whole beautiful life, this legacy of love that would ripple forward through generations. It was more than Cassandra had ever dreamed possible, more than she had dared to hope for during those dark days after her father's death when the future seemed bleak and uncertain. But she had survived. She had persevered. And she had found, in the vast emptiness of the Wyoming prairie, in the kindness of a stranger who became her everything, the greatest gift of all. A love that endured, a partnership that sustained, and a home that was built not of timber and stone but of commitment and trust and the daily choice to keep choosing each other, no matter what. As dawn broke over the ranch the next morning, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Cassandra woke to find Dalton already up, standing at the window and looking out over the land they had tamed together. She joined him, slipping her hand into his, and together they watched the sun rise on another day, another chance to love each other. Another blessing in a lifetime of blessings that had all begun with a lame horse and a cowboy's simple kindness. This was their story, their legacy, their gift to the future. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.